Hello, Silas here, and I'm back with a series of Dishing on Dish, which is a sub-series of the You Are What You Consume series, which is a series where me and my friend Steven talk about different topics and different things, and this one is specifically talking about actual dishes, actual foods, and actual things like that. And Steven, say hello and tell us a bit about this series, not the series, but what we're talking about today.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So we're going to be resuming our discussion about seasonal restaurant and Weinbar. This is what was my second job in New York City here. Unfortunately, the restaurant is now closed. It's been closed a few years, but I do have a lot of fond memories here. I have a lot of old photos, so I thought it'd be worth discussing this also, in part because I can proudly say that I prepared one Michelin Star food, and also with my Austro-Germanic heritage, I took an interest in this type of cooking as well. So I thought this would be a good topic to discuss, and I think Silas has been enjoying this so far. I have a lot of dishes, a lot of good memories. So, well, we're going to continue discussing that today.
Yeah, and with this one, You Are What We Consume is the greater series that this is a part of. And with that, I was just on the whole idea that you actually are what you consume physically, like the protein, the fats, the carbohydrates. You break those things up, and then it actually becomes part of your body. Then we just started thinking about what actually else is in that process. And as human beings, we're also the ideas and the thoughts and the things that we consume. And then it goes into, okay, why do certain cultures consume certain things? Then not just the things that are consumed. Why do certain things in certain areas consume certain aspects of that area and become the plant, become the food? So it's just talking about that in general, and we've talked about that, different things with food industry, talking about restaurants like the French Laundry, talking about how something becomes a family recipe and then goes to become a Michelin star. But in this subsection of Dishing on Dish is a bit more, it's a bit more focused actually on the food, and we've talked about at least 5 different restaurants where Stephen has just been going out different places in New York City, taking pictures of the foods and letting us know, like, okay, this food is made in this way, this is prepared in this other way, and he has a lot of knowledge about the actual foods himself from looking and searching on these things and himself, and just being an infoholic like I am, but also from having multiple years in the food service industry. And you can also check out this different series that we have with I Know Great People, where he talks more specifically about his experience in the food service industry. But he's had that background. And with this series, I'm really enjoying this series even more than the other ones, because as he mentioned, this is one that he's actually worked in and he's actually played a part in putting together some of these dishes. So he's giving us a bit more info on not just the food, but also the behind the scenes of like how some of these things come to be, like from actual lived experience. Whereas previously he had certain ideas or from knowing people or from having that awareness on that. So that's been really exciting so far. Anything else you want to say?
No, again, as I said last time, I mean, if you want a more in-depth discussion about the restaurant itself, the history, all that, that was in part one. I don't really feel the need to rehash it here because it's a bit of info. So, well, I figured let's just jump right into the food. Yep.
Yeah. And with this series, the way we go through it, we just talk about different kind of dishes, and then we have wherever you listen to this, there should be a menu, a listing somewhere below or somewhere around of the dishes, so you can jump around and take your time with it, or you can go back to the previous parts, and that's also in there, the timestamps for the different dishes that are being discussed. And as you mentioned in the first one, there was about 30 to 45 minutes, so he's telling us a lot more about the history, about the people that actually ran this restaurant. We've discussed about where they've gone since then and other things like that. And those are conversations that come up in the general as we go and talk about the specific dishes. And we opened up this series. Part one was just the amuse-bouches, and then this part two was a bit of amuse-bouches, and was part two also just amuse-bouche?
No, amuse-bouche and some appetizers, and this last part was when we started getting into the entrees. Yeah.
Yeah, so then the third part was appetizers and entrees, and this one is just going to be completely entrees. We're going to try to make it all the way through until the desserts, but we're about halfway through the document. The way it happens is Steven sends me the document with the pictures in it, and slight apologies on the pictures this time. This was from some time back, so the image quality isn't as good as it has on the previous series that we've had on some of the things. But we talk about the dishes. He sends me the dishes, and I edit the images, get them ready to put up, and I look at, maybe I'll just skim over them, but I don't know anything really much about the actual food and things like that. So we break down it dish by dish, and he just tells me details about it. I go through and I try to not butcher the actual names of the things as we go into it. And sometimes we talk about the names, sometimes we talk about the history, sometimes it goes off off into the woods and other things. But it's an enjoying series. I've been enjoying it. I enjoy speaking with Stephen, and so far we've had rather good reception with the people who've actually taken the time to listen to these. And thank you to guys, gals, and everything else in between that have been doing that. So
Sure.
without further ado,
Yep. Let's jump right
our
in.
faces are going to go off the screen now, and then the foods are going to be in here. Okay, so the first dish we have is kaisergulasch.
Yep.
Okay, I got that right. It's probably going to get worse as we go. So this one is veal cheeks, paprika, fried capers, creme fraiche, candied lemon peel, roasted red and yellow peppers.
Sure. All right, so goulash is it's actually a Hungarian dish, not an Austrian dish. You can tell by the spelling here, though, that's the Germanic spelling. Kaiser just means emperor. Kaiser, for those who don't know, that comes from the word Caesar, so that's the title that their emperors took. Typically, it's a braised meat dish. This one's a little, I don't know, fancier is the right word, but for example, we use veal cheeks, which were a little pricier and more tender. Typically, what it is that it's veal cheeks that are seared, and then you usually add tomato paste, tomatoes, paprika. Sometimes the paprika is toasted. That gives it more flavor. That cooks down and forms a sauce, which it sort of braises in. So then for the rest of the components, fried capers, it just adds a bit of texture. Capers, for those who don't know, they're the pickled bud of a flower. They have like a saltier flavor. They're brined. If you fry them, they have a crunchy texture and nice taste. Creme fraiche, typically you put sour cream on this, but creme fraiche, it's a little fancier, so there you go. Candied lemon peel. I'm not sure if it typically is served with lemon, but what you did here was you took lemon zest, you shaved off the yellow. You want to make sure there's no white because it's bitter. You cut it really thin, then you cut it into strips, and you put simple syrup, that's sugar and water, over top when it's hot, and that sort of candies the lemon peel. And then you just take a little bit with tweezers and put it on top of the dish. And then the roasted red and yellow peppers, what you did was you roasted red and yellow peppers over a flame, peel off the burnt outside, scrape off any black, and then you take the red and the yellow peppers, you cut them into pieces. Typically we did triangles. It was just a nice design on the plate. Those went on at the end as well. So you can see you have a few different flavors and textures here. If I remember correctly, goulash, I think it means like shepherd's boy or something. I know Wolfgang, my boss, he was from Borgenland. That was the part that borders Hungary. So in that part of Austria, these type of dishes are pretty common. Yep. Thoughts and questions? Yep.
Capers, capers just sounds like it should be some kind of meat product now. See what it is. Like, it sounds like some kind of like bacony type of product that I would think that's what it would be. But yeah, it's this little buds of fruit is this a specific flower or just any flowers really? What flowers?
It's a specific flower. Typically what it is you basically pick the flowers. You pick the inside bud of the flower before they bloom, and then it's a caper bush, actually it's called, and
Okay.
it's usually like it grows in like the Mediterranean, Italy, Morocco, Spain, that area. And what you do is before the green flower bud, before it blooms, you pick that and then brine it. This is one of those things, like I'm not sure how they figured out how to do that, but it came out pretty well. There's also caper berries, which grow on the same plant, if you've ever had those. Those are similar. They're a little bit bigger though, and they have it's a different texture. Like they're a little bit bigger and they have seeds inside. I'm trying to think of what I'd compare them to. But it's like those are a similar thing as well. It's just it's big in a lot of Mediterranean cooking.
Okay, yeah, we'll have those on the screen. I think this is a good aside. Yeah, we'll have them on the screen right now. The capers. We say, what are capers? Spruce Eats seemed to be a site that has been coming up relatively a few times on this. Yeah. So origin. So the caper bush in the Mediterranean. Caper versus caperberry, as you mentioned. Yeah, what does it taste like? Okay, I'm trying to see the history. Do they have the history here? How they came to be? No, they don't really seem to have. Okay, what's the origin of? They said the origin just in the Mediterranean. But yeah, and these are some of the things that are just kind of cool to think of. That in the past, it was like, who was the first person to eat a caper? And then realize part of the cuisine.
I found here it goes back to 2000 BC, where it's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So yeah, it's dried. Yeah, it's dried in the sun and then pickled in vinegar, brine, water. Vinegar, brine, wine, or salt. Yeah. So I don't. This is probably one of those things where maybe like something spilled on one, or it fell into something, and they thought, "Hey, this tastes good. Let's." And then that just became a thing. I mean, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. And if it's Epic of Gilgamesh, I'm sure most of you who are listening to this have probably heard of the story, but some might, even if you've heard of it, it's the oldest known story. I mean, yes, I'm sure people were telling stories before. I'm sure people wrote down stories before, but it's the oldest story that we know of that's actually lasted from when it was originally written and still being told in that form that it's been originally written. So this is one of the earliest dishes. And you see this in a lot of things like in manga and anime and things like that. There's a lot of dishes and even a more contemporary, more Western writing like what's it called? The one of the biggest stories right now is even like with Harry Potter, there was like the butterbeer, there was different meals,
Yeah.
but the Songs of Ice and Fire, the books by George R. R. Martin, which I think some of the biggest books right now. When you actually read the books, there's a lot more that goes into like the actual foods and things like that. He spends like times like the mulled wines, like is a typical thing that's often discussed. But a lot of stories are normally told by the actual focus on food in the stories. It seems to be a common thing, especially in these epic type of stories, to get to know more about the characters and the areas, because there's a lot you can tell about people and places just from the food. Like he mentioned, the chef was from that area, and that's probably why goulash is in there. That's probably why you've had some influences. And with
Yeah.
this one, he's mentioned it's Austrian, but there's some German influences. And just tell us where were the chefs again from?
Okay, so they're both from Austria. Eddie is actually from Vienna, the capital, and then Wolfgang is from Burgenland, which is the most eastern province that borders Hungary. Borg. I got to look up the history behind that because it's Borg, Burg, and Borg means like castle or fort, so it means like castle land. So I don't know, maybe there were a lot of forts out there at one point or something. I don't know the history, but like I say, because it's in that region, you see the Hungarian influence because you figure Austria and Hungary were one country, Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there's a lot of crossover there. Like it's sort of like how people in the south of France, the Provence cooking, you see some Italian influence with tomatoes and olives and things. Or if you're in Alsace, you see the Germanic influence with like sauerkraut, cabbage, apples, sausage.
Yeah.
So, like there's sort of that regional influence as well. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, and okay, so here with the veal cheeks. Now this is again another whole hog thing, and this is something that is a lot more typical with older types of cuisines. A lot of people who eat now, I mean, even I guess back then, it was depending on your station in life, you'd probably you would have access to different parts of the foods. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, at least from what I'm thinking, a lot of these older foods, these older dishes, a lot of this cuisine seems to have certain off it's there's not too many old cuisines where it's like a steak where it's like that's the primary part. It's normally these kind of off things, and part of that could be due to, as you mentioned, how does this thing start to be dropped? Is something just drop into something? And I think it was due to the fact that certain other parts were not being handled as immediately and directly as the main parts of the animals or the plants. So they were preserved, or they were held, or they're stored, or they were forgotten somewhere, and then somebody saw it, or some other people were trying to make the best out of something that they couldn't just eat it as just the raw whole kind of nature of it. So they would add different preparations to it in order to maintain it for some time, and that has actually lasted for some time. Or even some things, maybe certain cuisines in very limited areas done by the kings and queens. Once that family kind of died off, nobody actually kept that out. But all the peasantry that was living there, they kept getting taken over by different kind of families. Their foods would actually last long enough and be passed on, and then that's kind of what has carried on. So there could be something in there. I don't know. What do you personally think about this? Also, people
I'm
listening, what do you
actually
think comes to that?
I'm glad you brought that up because I just remembered Wolfgang actually taught me that goulash was originally made with the calf of the cow, and you figure that's a very tough part because you think about it like if you like my calves are super strong personally, but you think about it like that area gets a lot of activity, so those are going to be super strong muscles. So typically, what it was you took that very tough piece of meat and just braised the hell out of it, and that became a stew which you served. And it was also he said shepherd's boy because that was something that farmers would eat. Like you're a farmer, you're poor, you take the tough cut of meat, you find a way to make it good. Veal cheeks are more of a luxury item because you figure veal is pricier than beef, and then cheeks it's a smaller part, and a lot of people like cheeks because they're tender, higher fat content. I always think of Silence of the Lambs, that scene, but he also even said that the cheeks were his favorite part of the fish because that's where they're most tender and stuff. But that's what this is. This was like sort of a slight, like it's still a peasant dish, but it was like a slightly higher end take on it. So like if you were to go back to Hungary, a few centuries ago, they would not be using veal cheeks most likely.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you said with the candied lemon peel, I've tried to do some of the candies. The white part is more bitter than the
Yeah,
rind. Okay,
yeah,
that I did
it's
not
it's
know.
it's called the pith, P-I-T-H. You're supposed to scrape that off completely, because it is sort of imparts a bitterness, whereas the lemon, it's more just the oils and like kind of it's more aromatic, the smell, but you do get some lemony flavor too. But if you bite into the white, it becomes more bitter. It might come up in another discussion, but there's a German bread, Stollen. It's the stuff you make around Christmas time. And what I like about that is that actually has various candied peels in it, as well as candied fruits. So Les Bollier, where I did my externship, they actually made like candied orange zest, candied lemon zest. I think there was like one or two others in-house, and then you put all of that into the dough and baked it, and it was like really good. But you have to cut out the white because it has more of a bitterness, and you're aiming for sweeter. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I didn't know, but I do sometimes use just the zest. You just get one of those really fine graters and grate off the lemon stuff when I'm doing like some baked goods sometimes. Even it's like with rice and things like that sometimes. So yeah, I never really thought about that, but yeah, okay, that's good to know. Shall keep that in mind if I need to do that next time. And
Sure.
again, now this one has different things. I always ask this with a creme fraiche. I mean, I often ask this with a creme fraiche. In this situation, is it served at room temperature or is it chilled?
It's usually cold just scooped on top because the idea is that it's taking some of the original components. Like for example, it's typically sour cream. There's usually just like a dollop on top, but here it's creme fraiche. They're usually, if I remember correctly, also I'd add that I think the peppers are actually in the sauce. But here the idea is that if you roast them and put them on top, it's a better presentation because like you see these nice red and yellow triangles on the plate rather than just have them mixed in with the sauce, which doesn't look as nice. So that's one factor.
So there's some more in the sauce though.
The sauce is more tomato based, but I'm saying classically, I think the peppers are in the sauce itself.
Okay.
There's also paprika, which is a type of pepper. That's where the color of the sauce comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing for those who have cooked with the bell peppers. It's something that like I normally put in like very close to the end if I'm doing some kind of stew or some veg, because the color will get sapped out of it very, very quick if you actually have them in any kind of stew or any kind of steaming situation. So yeah, that's something. And as Stephen mentioned, this is a Michelin restaurant, so with the plating and the things, there's a lot more thought and process into different textures and mouthfeels and coolness and hotness and shapes of things that go in. Whereas in some places you might get food that tastes just as good, but I think that's one of the defining characteristics of Michelin star restaurants is the combination of different things and the plating and just there's some more thought and there's some more artistry, I think, to the whole actual situation that's being presented. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and again, this is a peasant dish, but the idea was to like make it a little higher end. I mean, it's like I don't think you'd go to a 3 Michelin star restaurant and see something like this, but it's still like retaining some of that traditional Austro-Hungarian cooking, but refined a bit. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So kaisergulasch, king's
Yeah.
goulash.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything else you have to say about that one?
No, that's good. It was a really nice dish. I liked it. Yeah.
Okay. So now the next one we have tafelspitz. Tafelspitz.
Tafelspitz. Tafelspitz.
Tafelspitz.
Yep, there you go.
Tafelspitz.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a flat iron steak,
Yep.
oxtail consume, or is it consomme or consume?
Consommé.
Consomme. An oxtail consomme served with apple horseradish sauce and rösti.
It's rösti. I'll get into that below. So
Rösti?
this is a rösti. So the umlaut above it, it's an sound, so it's a rösti. Yeah. So this is another traditional Austrian dish. Tafelspitz actually means tip of meat for the table. Originally, tri-tip steak was used, but in this version we used a flat iron steak. Again, it was just like an attempt to make it a little more presentable because if you see the original preparation, it's another like very rustic looking dish, which like it tastes good, I'm sure, but like it doesn't look that great on a plate. So the flat iron steak they liked because it has that like it's a more solid, more composed shape. Like when you cut it like this, it looks like a flat iron. There's a piece of connective tissue in the middle, but if you cook it, it breaks down well. Like I don't know if you've ever had, if you've had like pho, like the Vietnamese soup, you can do like tenon and tripe. The middle part is kind of like that. Like it looks a little tougher, but you cook it down, it gets nice. So typically it was cooked. It's like tri-tip steak, but here it's flat iron, cooked with a beef broth. It's not actually oxtail. I guess they just called it that. But it's a consommé. For those who don't know, it's a clear broth. It's clarified usually with egg whites. And then on top there's some let's see, what is it here? Baby. Oh, sorry. It was raw turnip shaved, some baby carrots, and then some baby leek, and then the sauce and the rösti I'll get into below. But did you have any questions about the plate itself? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking about how you hardly see any steaks and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and the next one's a steak. But yeah, and with the baby stuff, I asked this previously. I was wondering, like, because I know with like baby corn, there actually is kind of like really small corns and things like that. But I was wondering with some of these, is there actually some strains of stuff that are just smaller than the regular ones? Because they'll be like microgreens or some things like that just actually do grow smaller. But no, in this situation, it's normally they just get regular radish, regular carrots, and they either shave them down or just get or what's it called? They shave them down or they just harvest them a lot earlier in their whole lifespan. That's how it gets to the baby thing. What was it? Horseradish? Was that? No, horseradish. Yeah, horseradish is it's an interesting type of thing. Horseradish, it's the same one that they make the wasabi out of, right? Well, it's a
No,
different.
no. Wasabi is actually a different root. It's a similar family, but wasabi, if you see fresh wasabi, it's actually a green root with like a black peel.
Yeah.
Horseradish is white with the like darker. I think it's like a darker peel. I forget. But it's the same family. Some people have even called wasabi Japanese horseradish. So
yeah, that's okay. That's why. Yeah, but there's still it's not as strong of a taste. But some who haven't had it yet, there is some tanginess to it. There's a bit of a bite to horseradish, but not as much as you would have with actually the wasabi that they have. And I'm wondering, probably some of the wasabi that you do get in the United States of America or outside of Japan in certain places would be actually based off of horseradish and some food coloring and things like in there. Because the actual Japanese horseradish that's actually used for wasabi is rather expensive of a root to actually use. Like it's used very sparingly.
We used to have it at Neta, actually. We had the fresh wasabi as well as the other stuff. And the thing is, like, the fresh stuff we grated over a certain dish, but it was expensive. And it was one of those things, like, you could only use a little bit. And it was annoying because people would ask for extra. And I'm like, I can't really give you a lot because it's a pricier. Like, that's like somebody asking for extra truffles. I'm like, do you know how much? Like, I can't just give you free.
Yeah, because the way it's normally used at the average sushi place is just left out there, thrown. It's like a glob thrown at every kind of plate that comes out. No, you would not be able to do that with actual horseradish. Like people they're not flossing that hard yet.
Well, it was also like there with truffles, there's like cheaper versus more expensive varieties, and like there was a joke at Felidia where like the summer truffles were super cheap, so like they're like, oh, shave whatever you want over top, but the black winter ones are like 500 a pound, and I remember like there were a few annoying people who were like, can I have more? Can I have more? I'm like, I can't just give you, that's like saying, can I have another like $100 glass of wine? I'm like, I can't just give it to you.
Yeah. See, that's kind of knowing what you're eating. Yeah, this is interesting. It seems. What's the size of this dish? What's the size of the steak here?
Off the top of my head, I mean, I'm trying to remember. Maybe like 6 to 8 ounces, if I had to remember. Because I mean, it's like if you got this was an entree, and like this was like you'd get this in like maybe a side dish or something. But if I remember.
We'll see the rösti below.
Yep.
I forgot. I started saying that wrong again. But it was this dish always came with what was it? Rösti?
Rösti. It came with rösti and the cream spinach, which we're going to see below as well. That typically was
always came with it. Like you wouldn't just get the tafelspitz by itself.
Right. These typically came on the side along with the sauce, and then but you could also get the rösti or cream spinach as a side as well. So like, let's say you got schnitzel and you wanted cream spinach, you could do that too.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, and this is different because steaks are normally people are used to seeing steaks just outside roasted or grilled or just by themselves dry. So this is an interesting kind of presentation with it in some actual consume, like it's consommé, like in some actual sauce and things like that. So yeah, because normally when you see the sauce normally chopped up into pieces. But yeah, so I guess we can transition to the next one.
Sure. Yeah.
It's kind of a 1A, 1B part of sort of thing. So here we have the rösti.
Rösti. Like the Ruhr Valley.
Okay, so rösti.
Yeah.
Okay, we have the rösti, which is apple horseradish sauce and chive sauce for the tafelspitz. And cucumber slaw with the Wiener Schnitzel. The Wiener Schnitzel is back.
So I was trying to get a photo of the cucumber salad by itself. I couldn't find any. I looked around. This was always served with the schnitzel. I forgot to mention, by the way, schnitzel in Austria, when you order it, they say there's typically two preparations. There's either potato salad. Some people also do parsley potatoes, where you saute potatoes and there's some parsley to finish. But this place, they always did it with potato salad. The other thing that comes with it is the cucumber salad. Now, the cucumber salad here is actually very interesting the way it was done. What we did was we took cucumbers, peeled them, and then we cut them on a mandolin. So for those who don't know, mandolin, it's a bladed instrument, but they come out, the pieces come out almost like spaghetti, like these like long thin strips. And you would actually put some salt on them on the cucumber, and you would put it above a perforated pan so the water would seep out. And that was a combination of the salt would give flavor, but it would also like bleed out the excess water. That way the flavor is more concentrated. And then you would mix the cucumber after you squeezed out all the water. You'd mix it with, like, I want to say sour cream. There's a little bit of vinegar. There's a little bit of dill, some salt, and then mix that all together. And then what you did was, I'd have to show you another thing, but a lot of people serve pasta like this, where you take tweezers and then you twist it up along the side and you roll. It's almost this like little tight bundle, and you put it on the plate. It was very elegant, I thought. Yeah.
So this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, coleslaw is one of the. I mean, cucumber is one of the typical things I just add to the normal coleslaw, which is just. I mean, coleslaw people normally think you say carrots and cabbage, but yeah, cucumber is normally the thing I add. I normally add like cilantro, onions. Sometimes that's kind of gets it away from the coleslaw, but those are like the three kind of typical things I'd add. Also, like some cheese normally, like I add like some feta cheese or something. That's a typical type of things I would add to coleslaw. But this, an interesting take. But yeah, with the coleslaw, slaw in general. Yeah, now with slaw, now I'm probably gonna look that up. But where does slaw come from? Is slaw supposedly
coleslaw is actually a Dutch thing. Maybe we can have Kara on in the future. We can discuss this, but because cole in Dutch means cabbage, and then cole in German is cabbage as well. But the way they spell it, COLE, that's more similar to the Dutch spelling, whereas German is like the clothing store, KOHL. But it's a similar sort of thing. Like they're both big on cabbage. So. Yeah.
But then where did the carrots come into all that?
That's a good question. Again, I'm not as familiar with Dutch cooking. I know with the Germanic stuff, they're big on the cucumbers. That's why cucumber salad. But I don't know the exact history behind that, to be honest. I feel like I should, honestly. But
we'll leave that on the table. I mean, some of these things we don't really look up, but if we just keep looking everything up, we'll end up going off right there. I might look it up after. But yeah, okay.
So I was going to just elaborate on some of these other things here. So rösti is actually potato pancakes. In German, it's actually called Kartoffelpuffer. Rösti is actually the Swiss name. The Kartoffelpuffer is actually one of the German national dishes. And I always bring this up because when people think of German food, they tend to think of when Americans think of German food, they're really thinking of Bavarian food, like sausage, potato pancakes, and things. Those are Bavarian dishes mostly. Applesauce as well, like that's another Germanic thing. But what we did here was the rösti, if you shredded potatoes super thin, you put them in water, and then what you did was you pull it out, you put it in a pan. You sort of like cooked it on medium heat, so you would make the potato golden brown on both sides, flip them over, similar to hash browns, I guess, if you had to think of a comparison. Yeah. And then the chef would actually stamp them out with a ring mold. Then when it came time to pick them up, you'd finish them because they weren't cooked through all the way. You'd finish them in the pan so they get crispy, and then you'd put those up and serve them. And then the two sauces here are the sauces that were served with the tafelspitz. So there's apple-horseradish sauce. It's very easy. It's just applesauce with horseradish grated into it. Austrians and Germans are big on apple and horseradish. The chive sauce was very interesting. So what you did was you soaked bread in milk, and then you'd actually take the bread out of the milk and you'd actually puree it. Now you added, I want to say, vinegar and a little salt, and then you'd actually you'd finish it with some chives on top. So the idea is it's like you get the bread, the vinegar, I'm trying to think what else is in there. Bread, vinegar, chives on top, a little bit of salt. Yeah, it was very, very interesting. It was kind of acidic, and the idea is that because it's kind of acidic, it like cuts through the fattiness of the steak. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Now you can do that. You can do many different things with that. Switch out the chives with other kind of herbs, or you can do different kind of flavors of bread. Yeah, that's interesting. I never really heard of the preparation of. Is that a typical type of sauce? Have you heard of this kind of preparation at other restaurants or other places you've worked or been?
Yeah, I think this is typically served with this dish. Like I say, I mean, this dish is a little higher end because typically you use tri-tip steak, which doesn't look as nice. We can put up a photo of tri-tip steak, I guess. Whereas the flat iron, it's more composed. And also it's consommé. Like I say, consommé. It's a broth that you basically make clear with the addition of egg whites and other things. And the thing is, typically it's more of like just sort of like a basic broth, which looks a bit cloudier. So like if you look up, we can find a dish of an original tafelspitz, but like the classic dish doesn't look so nice. It just looks like a kind of like a stew or something. But this is a little more refined. So it's like a nicer take on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Put bread in the sauce. Okay, now have you seen bread-based sauces made by other people in other cuisines in other places, or is this something that is uniquely towards this kind of cuisine?
I I actually have not. I was trying to think if the Italians did something similar, but I may be misremembering. I'm not sure. But as far as I know, I don't think anyone else does this, at least not to my knowledge. I mean, maybe the Scandinavians do. I don't know. Like I feel like they would do something like this because they like vinegar and stuff, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and with that's a good tip that there we have some chefing it up tips as we go with these things. When you are making something like hash browns, that is something that people don't really understand
Mm,
to do. If you want to get that crispiness that you find
mm,
at when you have hash browns outside or you get them from stores, you really have to do that cold water type of treatment that saps the starch out of the actual
yeah.
potato first, and then you're supposed to dry it down again, pat it
Yeah.
down with some paper towels or some cloth, or let it sit for enough for it
Yeah.
to actually get dry again. Because if you just grate them down and then put them on the pan to get them crispy, they're going to burn before they get crispy.
Yeah.
So that's just something to keep in mind.
Well, also the
Yeah.
water prevents them from oxidizing too, because they can sit in water for a bit before you use them. But like you say, the
Mhm.
key is to squeeze out the water. And also, I learned when you do this too, you don't you want to do like moderately high heat, because the idea is that the like what's left of the starch kind of bleeds out and then it kind of sticks together and then it gets crispy on the outside, and that's how you have the texture. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I have anything. Yeah, and then with this also you can probably do different flavorings, but I'm guessing there wasn't too much flavor. It was just potato on the actual on the little potato pancakes. Did they put any spices or anything in it, or is this?
No, these were just as is, but I mean, I've seen them made with thyme. I've seen like rosemary chopped up and put in. I mean, it's you think of any potato preparation, like what else you would put in that. I mean, maybe you could do like I'm trying to think, maybe you do like a different type of sauce, like maybe do a cheese sauce on the side or something. Like I think you could do a lot of different things if you want to do.
And
But it's
what was the
also
fat?
it was just like oil. Yeah, vegetable
Okay,
oil probably. Yeah.
yeah, good, good. But I
Yeah.
guess you could also do it with the lard, like if you're making the Wiener
Yeah.
schnitzels, that you say that's on the side. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And then yeah, the sweetness you have with the apple kind of sauce and things. They make the applesauce in house.
No, actually, they bought it. I'm ashamed to say, but yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, but that gives me another idea. I mean, you could make your own applesauce and add different things to it. I used to make applesauce as a kid. I enjoyed making it. I mean, we use one of those food mills that you use for like mashed potatoes. I used to do that, like where you cook them and you just run it through that. I mean, you can do chunkier, thinner, sorry, smoother. You can add different spices. You could even do it like a slightly more savory applesauce, like you add like a little bit of vinegar or something. I mean, again, I mean maybe some honey. Like you could do different things with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm guessing applesauce wasn't really used in too many other dishes besides this, right?
No, no, it because that's the thing. It's like it's an additional project, and it's like if you're just going to use it for one item, it's like not really a huge deal.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely refer back to in the first of any series we've talked to. We talk more about the actual restaurant themselves. With this one, of course, as we mentioned, Stephen worked here, so he went into a lot of detail of just the cost benefit analyses, the calculations that were being made, some explanation or some thoughts onto why it went out of business. And these are the close margins that you have, and it's just
Yeah.
very few businesses in general. When you're running a business, your margins of actual profits, not earnings. People look at some businesses and say, "Oh, this business earned like $10,000 this year or $10,000 this quarter." Yes, they might have sold $10,000 worth of things, but much of that money goes back to the research and development, buying different things, paying bills and things like that. So profits is normally like if you have a business running on like 3% profits, that's amazing in many
Yeah.
cases. And with restaurants, especially restaurants more specific than other fields, I think, is one of the ones where it's much tighter than that situation. It fluctuates so much because it's so dependent on people coming in, so dependent on fluctuations of prices of the foods in the background. Now you have many restaurants that have the food and have the things that you're trying to restart, but people don't want to come and work. There's so many different moving parts in the restaurant industry. I think is good to be familiar with because it's an industry that across the board we all eat and we're all somewhat familiar with, and we can all relate to and appreciate. And that's part of why I've really been enjoying this series in specific with Stephen, and thanks to Stephen, is getting more knowledge about the food makes me appreciate food more. And when I learned how to cook from my mom and things like that and cooking, that's always had some appreciation of it. But getting now more information about actual restaurants helps me to, when I go to a restaurant, appreciate it. Be like, okay, I'm going to order something that I probably won't be able to make at home by myself because I know the ingredients have lots of ingredients, or it might teach me how to make something at home better. Those are the kind of things that I decide when I actually do go to restaurants, even though I cook a whole lot at home and have had the access to that. But yeah, this is some background on the stuff that's why it makes sense here, the applesauce. I'm not like, I can't believe they ordered applesauce. If you're doing applesauce as a side to a main dish that's ordered by very few people, to spend maybe like hours a day or hours a week in a rather small kitchen, as some of the images have been coming up in this series, to do this doesn't make sense for that. Like the value added, the cost benefit analysis, this doesn't make sense.
Well, I was going to just bring up for a sec. I talked in the other interview we did I talked about working at the retirement home. And that was kind of the other side of this, where a lot of stuff was prepackaged. And it was funny because I used to complain to my boss, like, I'm like, oh, I wish we made more stuff from scratch. And he's like, Kirshner, I don't have the budget or manpower or whatever to do all this. He's like, I'm working with what I have. But that's the other side of it. They would rather, if you buy a lot of that prepackaged stuff and you're a big institution like that, you can buy in bulk. So you actually save money just buying a ton of stuff. And then you have people who are maybe lower skilled just sort of putting it out. Whereas in these other places, you're hiring people higher skilled, they're a little more, it's a bit more demanding, but you're willing to make things from scratch and put in more of the effort to do that. So you have to, as you just said yourself, you have to sort of weigh those cost benefit each way of like, okay, we're serving institution food. I have a few people coming in a few hours a day because also, again, remember the hours that I worked there, I worked like 8-hour shifts. So it's like you come in, you throw together some pre-made stuff, do a few things from scratch, but a bunch of things already prepackaged versus a typical restaurant. It's like you come in early in the morning, you get your stock, sauces, other things going, you get your in-depth projects going, and then people come in at night, prep like the last minute stuff. But it's like, it's set up in a way where the staff is there more, there's more of that attention to detail. There's more of that stuff from scratch. But again, you're catering to a different audience. That's also why you're charging a higher price. Whereas an institution, it's more, okay, let's find a way to efficiently feed a lot of people. Like, not to say you throw quality out the window completely, but it's like you're going to have to make certain compromises as far as quality versus like, okay, what's realistic with the budget and staff and spacing and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are considerations that you do have to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to move to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. So here, sometimes I just forget. Like we talk about so many things that the words go out, and I think in my mind's also like, when are you going to say this word again? Don't actually remember it. So rösti, is it rösti?
Rösti.
Rösti, and cream spinach. This is a rather interesting. I'm a big fan of cream spinach. This is like pureed spinach. I would say this is more pureed spinach than cream spinach.
So this is the rösti from above. I mean, we just explained that. There's also the chive sauce at the top, you'll notice. So the cream spinach is basically, those of you who made cream spinach, I think you know what that is. But the idea with this was that you blanch it and you added the cream and stuff and pureed it last minute, so it kept the bright green color. So it tasted like cream spinach, but it was in a puree form, and then you would strain it out, so it would be this nice green, almost like puree. Again, it was just, I guess it's an attempt to make the dish higher end. Because, like, even if I go to, like, a French bistro, I typically just get, like, spinach with cream or sauteed. But this was made with, this was puree to make it look nicer. Eddie said he used to eat cream, like his grandmother made cream spinach. So I don't know if that's big in Austria. I never really asked. But I think it's probably one of those dishes. Like, I know the French are big on it, too. But it's one of those dishes that over time probably became more popular there.
Yeah. But yeah, with the kind of different preparations of different things, people might have different takes on certain things. And also, as we were just talking about before, just with the amount of time that's put in, and hopefully this is something that will increase, because this is how things were before. You'd have small little communities and you'd sit together and certain foods would be made in a group. Like as we mentioned, how some dishes would be taken in and you'd have certain parts that other people would eat, but different kind of things would come together. Like when you had a cow, it would come and the community would get different parts for different times of the day over time. So you'd get a more variety of the different dishes that you're actually having. And with some of these things, like talk about the time to actually make some things. For many people right now, they're like, I don't really have that much time to make my own applesauce even at home, so I'm just going to buy stuff. But you can have a situation where maybe if you have a community of people, you can say like, if there wasn't so many certain regulations of certain limitations on what restaurants could do, what individuals can do, you can have situations where you have more of these communities. Like right now, you have things like HelloFresh that deliver food to places. People are finding different ways to use technology to actually eat. Now I'm thinking social kitchens, social networking type of ways where you can have like a group of people who you say, okay, we have a group of friends, and then instead of doing like a potluck, you can have pot dishes where it's like somebody's like, okay, I'm going to put 2 hours aside to make some applesauce because I really like applesauce, and I don't want to just keep buying the bought applesauce. But the amount of time it takes me to actually make enough applesauce for one person, I could make enough for 20 people. So you kind of join some kind of site where you do that 20 people type of thing, and then you're like, okay, we're making applesauce, somebody else is making something else, somebody else is making something else, and then that way you can now each share that time and you can kind of share that thing around. That's something that happens more in developing countries. Like here, I know here in Nairobi, Kenya, it seems to be more smaller communities where you go to visit someone, you bring them some food, or they bring you some food, or they bring you some of their harvest. Now, this could be maybe depending on who you're living with, people that you know. I don't know how much this actually exists in the United States of America, but especially in a place like New York City, I'm thinking this can be done so much. Restaurants are told, oh, you have to have a license to do this. You can only serve food on the plate in the restaurant in this time. But then some restaurants could be like, we have the people and ability. If we're making our own applesauce, we could make like enough applesauce for other people to just come and buy applesauce, just the applesauce for us. But then no, you have to package it to this point. It has to have this license. It has to go to this store. It has to go to this manufacturer. Then it has to be put on this. But it's like the people really, nobody who's making the applesauce in the restaurant would be like, I want to just poison people. And it's just some of these limitations that you see with some of these things are just reducing community. These things are supposed to be for the greater good, for the greater community, seem to actually reduce the actual effect. And this is some of the state mutation that we have many other series talking about or dislike with some of these things. But that's just my little rant about the frustration
Well, I
with,
mean,
with these
I,
things.
I I'm from a very rural area, and we did this on some small extent growing up. Like neighbors would give us like peaches and honey. It's like if I had known
Yeah,
better at the time, I could have made like mead out of that honey and given it to other neighbors. Or like peaches. You can make peach pie or peach preserve. Give that out. Then like okay, another neighbor gives apples. They can give you apples. You in turn can make applesauce. Give it to other people. It's like I don't see why I mean if it's like a few people exchanging among a few houses in a neighborhood, like are you really worried that they're going to poison like the large numbers of people? It doesn't really make much sense. No.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's ways to get aside that because people might say, okay, in a city, somebody could poison somebody and then disappear. You'll never see that person again. But also in
Yeah.
the inverse, there's now ways you can get to know these people because
Yeah.
you'd think in a situation where you have so many more people together, you should be able to benefit more from people coming together and doing things. But then you see in the rural areas where people are more spread apart, there seems to be more of an actual communal type of thing. And it's just
Yep.
some unfortunate thing that I've noticed, at least living in New York City. And maybe I wasn't living in New York City long enough to actually establish, but I established, I guess, some close friends like Steven and a few other people. But there's a distance that's out there and I think there's some projection from some people in living in those kind of environments that project that life. They're like, if life here around all these people is this lonely, then out in the sticks and the boons must be even more lonely. When it's kind of the inverse. Like those people in the sticks and the boons seem to maybe because they have so much distance, they can be like, okay, I'm going to choose to come and deal with. I don't know what necessarily is behind
Well,
that, but yeah.
well, it's actually funny you bring that up because when I was a kid, I actually went through the opposite, where I thought I would come to the city and I'd have a million friends. But then it's like I came here and I'm like, wow, I don't know anybody. I mean, obviously I've made friends over time. I mean, workplaces, culinary school, meetup, on and on. But like it's not like you come here and you have a million friends that you see all the time. Plus, people are working, people have families. It's not like there are a million people living right outside your place that you can just hang out with whenever. I think as a kid, I sort of like thought that's how it was. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. Because and maybe it's also like I was saying with the rosti,
worse,
the name almost
worsty.
like okay, rosti. so,
Rur,
so I
rur, rur,
rosti. So
rur.
I think I'm not going to say it again, so I don't really remember it. Yet if I'm in the sticks, I'll see somebody and be like, okay, I'm going to see that person again. That's like the one person that lives here, so I'll probably remember them in a different way. But I, but then also with like like if it's cream spinach, you know you'll get cream spinach as just a typical cream spinach. But then if you go to a place where there's so many different people, you might get cream spinach like pureed like this. And I don't know. I'm trying to think.
I typed the in the chat. I wrote the German spelling. So Kartoffelpuffer is actually the German spelling. This is Swiss, and I'd have to look up. But I know in an Austrian dialect, potato is actually Erdapfel, which means earth apple. That's sort of like the French pomme de terre, apple of earth. So I'm sure in Austria, one of the regions, there's probably another name for this too. So it's all the same dish. It just they call it something different. Yeah.
Yeah, seeing things in different ways. Yeah, this was probably comes from probably just the original. It was just like some nice boiled whole like halved potatoes, and then just some spinach with just like you just steam the spinach, and then you just put some fresh cream from the cow, and that was probably how it was originally served. Probably everything was probably in one bowl, and then now you've kind of added these different kind of ways of doing things. But it's interesting. I really like the green. The green really comes out and it maintains the color of it. And now you have the crispiness, and then you have the puree-ness of it. You can imagine even like dipping it in like little Oreos type of thing, like getting little chunks. But yeah, that's the good dish.
And like I said, but one of the pains like with the green stuff is you have to make it pretty frequently because it starts to fade over time. So it's like I don't think they made this daily, but like maybe like every like other day or something, because I remember at like Bar Balut it was the same thing where like the entremet came in and had to blanch, like they had a cream spinach that was made like this too, and like you had this like massive like thing of spinach, you had to puree all of it with cream, and then you push it out through the chinois, the fine mesh sieve, into this like flat container where it cooled on top of ice, and you had to cool it down quickly because that's how you keep the color. But then when you heat it up, it's like you get it hot quickly, pour it into the container and serve it, but it's like if you were to heat it up over and over, it would turn brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this used to be a separate dish by itself. This you'd order this off the menu.
Yeah, you could order these as sides. A lot of people did. Yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't like it wasn't on the menu together, but it was.
If you went to the side dish section, it would be down there. Like the same thing with the next dish we're about to go over. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think good a time as any. Let's move on to that next dish.
Sure.
And this is I've said this before. It's spätzle. And that is the spätzle with berg. Now, käse or käse.
Käse. Yeah, there you go. Käse.
Berg käse, which is gruyere, that's cheese, right? Cheese. Yep. And creme fraiche again, and chives. Oh, that was like chives. I'm not already saying like different kind of things. Okay, so spätzle.
So I talked more about it in the previous section, so I'm not going to get into exactly what spätzle is, but it's an egg-based pasta that's kind of rustic shape. This was actually a side dish. Bergkäse means literally mountain cheese, and gruyere is from Switzerland, so you can tell like that's what it's referring to. Gruyere is common in like if you have croque monsieurs, if you have French onion soup that's on top, it's big in French and French cooking, and I guess some Swiss stuff, and of course they use it here too. So typically this you would just saute in the pan, then you would finish with the creme fraiche sort of. You put a little bit in, then you'd melt a little bit of the cheese, and then put it in the bowl here, and then chives on top. This again, like I say, is typically a side dish. Like you would just order this with other things. The same pasta as before. The difference was that the earlier one I showed had like other vegetables and things in this. This is just like the pasta with the cheese, the creme fraiche, and chives. Yeah, not a whole lot else to really say about that. Yeah.
This looks like a better take of a different take of like mac and cheese.
Yeah, well, it's similar, and I had mentioned in the previous one too how they have a preparation similar to mac and cheese where they'll do like a cheese sauce, breadcrumbs, and bake it like a gratin, and just scoop into it. So it's the same basic idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, not too much to say about this. It's a side dish, and as you mentioned, a lot of these things you can swap some of these things out. There's probably there's a range of cheeses that have the same body, the same texture, the same consistency as Gruyere that you can swap out and still maintain the same thing. And then, of course, with the chives, again, that's an herb, so you can switch out many different herbs as your taste to actually get on that. Are there too many herb allergies? Like, people have like fish allergies, bean allergies, like legumes, things like that. But I haven't really heard too many people with like herb allergies. I don't know if they are.
See, I don't think that's really real because what I've heard is that a lot of allergies are reactions to certain combinations of proteins. So it's like that's why you have like peanut or shellfish or egg. Some people say they're allergic to fruit and vegetables. I don't know exactly how that works, but my understanding is that like eggs are more common, nuts are more common, shellfish, dairy. And again, I always differentiate too that a dairy allergy is different from being lactose intolerant because the thing is lactose intolerant, you can't digest the sugar and milk. Dairy allergy, your body actually reacts negatively to the protein. So if you're lactose intolerant, you can take a lactose enzyme or have lactose in small doses, you're okay. But if you have a dairy allergy and you try to digest milk, it'll like they say it's like really painful and like you may break out in hives or there's some other bad reaction. Yeah.
Huh. Huh.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like the difference between something that's poisonous and something that's toxic. It's like they're not
Yeah.
necessarily the same thing. Like one of them breaks your body down, one of them like weakens your body and slows you down in a different way. Don't quote me on that, not a doctor.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so that looks good. The side dish again, this is not a big heaping, but I can imagine just getting this and just eating it by itself. You get enough
Yeah.
because it's like cheese. Yeah, the
Yeah.
cheese has been few and far in between in this, but it happens. It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next one.
Yep.
Here, and I think I'm going to get this. I'm going to stick the landing on the name of this one. Seasonal vegetables.
Yeah, there you go. So the so this was another side dish. Again, not a whole else lot to say about this. They sort of change season by season. Right here, what you can see is there's colored beets. There's the candy cane beets, the ones with the stripes that go through the middle. If you look at them when they're raw, it's actually very clear red and white stripes. When you cook them, they kind of bleed together. So you can still see the lines, but they're not as pronounced. It looks like, yeah, golden beets, and there's also some salsify, which I had mentioned in a previous discussion. Salsify it's a white root vegetable with a black peel, typically cooked in milk. A little kind of milder, like not as sweet as parsnip, a little more savory, but again, not milder than carrots. So like it mixes well with a lot of things because it's a little more neutral. Looks nice on the plate too, and just some microgreens on top. As you can tell by the name, this just changed season by season. So this looks like more of a fall thing, like beets, root vegetables. Springtime, it probably would have been like fiddlehead ferns and ramps. I'm trying to think like other times of year, like summer, maybe like more maybe like squash or something, just what's available and what the chefs felt like doing.
Yeah, this is a typical thing that you will see at more of the, I don't want to say like higher end, but even in Europe, even not the high end ones, and in general, it's been more typical to have seasonal kind of foods. This whole idea of just going to the same restaurant, having the same foods at all times, and that's one of the things. Most of the higher end ones, let's just call it higher end for the sake of it. Most of the higher end places, in your estimation, do have more varied seasonal type of menus, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, if you talk to French chefs, like they're really big on this. Like they'll only use strawberries in the summer. Like fall, winter, they will not use them unless they're either preserved or like candied or some other preparation. Whereas I find with a lot of I guess I could say more Americanized places, like even if they're like French style or something, you'll see a lot of seasonal items, but it doesn't strictly adhere to that. Like, and even here, I mean, we'll get into it below, but like there was a dessert that like was on during the winter that had strawberries on it, and somebody even made a joke. They're like, "Oh, you got those winter strawberries again" or something. But it's like, but again, it's like we're not strictly adhering to that. Whereas like classical French cooking, no, they would do that. They'd be like, "Oh, sorry, we're not going to use this stuff in the winter. It's not in season."
Yeah, and some of these things might change, may justifiably change because there's going to be a situation where people will find new means of planting things, greenhouses or things like that, or what's that, like the hydroponic planting and things like that,
Yeah.
where you can actually get the actual foods. And the reason it's not just like snuffy, like, oh, stick your nose up at things. It's just in general, when you get something and you get certain plants and you harvest them, sometimes plants are harvested before they're actually ripe, and then their actual natural process of ripening is frozen, and then they spray some things on it or they find some ways to actually get it out there. And there actually is a big change in the actual taste. Like as I mentioned, you are what you consume. And when a plant is frozen in that kind of state, like it's sprayed on things or different things that put into it, there's a flavor and things like that that actually come with the actual plant. Just in general, you just go get your regular fruit, put it in the freezer, eat that fruit fresh, eat one of the fruits fresh, put the other in the freezer, take it out the next day, eat it that way. You'll see there's already a different taste. There's something with the actual body of the animal, the way it sticks together, the bonds between the molecules and all those things do change when you do that. And
Yeah.
with certain cooking techniques, with certain things that certain chefs are going for, you're actually losing a bit of it in there. And this is something that comes up often. I'm also thinking eventually they will be replicators and things like that, sci-fi type of things where you'll be able to just put those things together, like we see with the Impossible Meat and things like that. They're getting to the point where they're understanding the fibers and the way meat is made, where it's actually comparatively close enough where they can grow meat. That will come, but we're not there yet. So there's actually a lot lost when you actually do this process of just having things 24/7 when you don't have the actual ability to plant it in as natural a way that it evolved in to actually be there.
Well, I would also add too, in regards to seasonality, people forget it. It's sort of like it's a similar conversation to what we say about the organ meats, where like in the past you ate the organ meats because you had to. You slaughtered the cow, you had to use the whole animal. It's just we produce enough meat where we can afford to throw that stuff away or sell it for super cheap. With the seasonal stuff, it's like if you were in France a few centuries ago, you were not importing strawberries from Chile. Like you just didn't have that option. Now in the US, it's like we want tropical stuff. Well, we can import it from Mexico, from the Caribbean, from Southeast Asia. It's like because the world is more connected, which obviously is a good thing. But if you look at the history behind that, it's like that's why they were very big on seasonal cooking. Yeah.
Yeah. And with some of these restaurants, you'll have like something where they'll have a general arrangement or general ingredients of things together to get a certain idea they want out there. So seasonal, you'll have, if that's your favorite type of dish, the arrangement, the textures and things like that, they'll have different ingredients to still maintain that same thing. Or in some situations, they'll have certain ingredients that they use around the year, but instead of having it just in the same kind of dish, they'll feature it in other kind of ways. Like I think in the amuse bouches when the amuse bouche, we had the series where like with the sweetbreads where some had like chestnut foam and chestnut crisps, and then another one had what's it called those little kind of tiny cabbage type of Brussels sprouts and things like that. But it's the same kind of arrangement of things, but the things that feature around it kind of change. So that's something that's kind of interesting that happens with some of these restaurants. And maybe it might be different in a place like here in Nairobi, Kenya, where you have pretty much same sort of things being planted around the year because it's right by the equator, so there's not too much fluctuation in the temperatures. So maybe in a place like that, you'd have a cuisine developed that doesn't really have as much seasonality and variety as places where you had winters. So that could be also something in there that drove some places to develop more intricate cuisines, whereas other places are just like, it's just food. It's still good, tasty, rough, tasty food, but it's not culinary. It's not as artistic because you're not having as many challenges on how to preserve or keep things over or do things in different ways. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next.
Yep.
Okay, here we have some. Let me see if this. Okay, the next swine. Okay, Zwine. Okay, Zwiebelrostbraten. Zwiebelrostbraten.
Actually, it's zwiebelrostbraten. You got the second part right. So zwiebel, it's the T. Remember the Z you say is like a TS sound, and then the W you say is a V. So you'd say that zwi like the I is an E sound. So it's zwi. You say that as one thing. It's zwiebelrostbraten. Yeah.
Zwiebelrostbraten. And then braten, is that the same from the bratwurst?
Yeah, so brat just means like roasted or seared. Like bratwurst, it's called bratwurst because a lot of the sausage they boil, but bratwurst you typically sear. So it's like seared sausage, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, let's say what it is here. It says wagyu beef, broccoli puree, black garlic puree, roasted cipollini onions, beef jus, lime gel, and hearts and fried greens. But when I saw this vi, I was thinking maybe it was like swine, but was it something that was originally pork and then they switched that out, or was vi something else that's not swine?
No. So zwiebel actually means onion. So it's a zwiebelrostbraten actually means onion roast beef. Typically, there was a beef dish here where they'd cook the beef and then the onions would actually be roasted and served on the side. So that's what it means. Onion, like it's onions served with the beef. So it's wagyu beef. That's American wagyu. So remember, wagyu refers to the cow, the type of cow, not how it's handled, but it usually has a higher fat content. Broccoli puree, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You blanch broccoli, cream and stuff, puree it. There's black garlic puree. The black garlic was really nice and it was funny because black garlic, for those who don't know, is big in Korea. What it is the black garlic. It's sort of fermented, so it gets this like darker color and has like a sweeter, more concentrated flavor. And you would cook that with port wine, some white garlic, some shallots. I want to say there's some like drier red wine, and then you would puree that. You can't get, there's not a good shot of it here. It's sort of towards the top left corner. There wasn't a ton of it on the plate because it's very strong, so it's like you don't need a lot of it. But it has like a nice, it's like a garlic flavor, but a bit sweeter, and it's like a bit richer, I would say. Lime jello was a lime juice mixed, I want to say, with the agar agar, so it's thick. A little bit of sugar too, just to sweeten it up a little bit. Beef jus, it's you know, you sear the beef, it's the runoff, the reduction, sort of like cooked down and reduced, and then hearts on fire on top. This might have been one of my favorite dishes there. Just a lot of really good flavors going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a similar again with the lime plating. It's similar as we had the plating of the lamb, which was the last one of the last series. And yeah, so again with this, but with swine, I'm thinking with swine. Swine is like more of a slang term for pork. I don't think there's any like actual classification where it says swine, but you could probably switch this out with other kinds of meats in the same kind of preparation, right?
Well, the German word for pork is Schwein. I mean, it's just Schwein. Yeah. Yeah, because you remember the pork belly. The pork belly was Schweinebauch. That means literally pork belly.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So it was somewhere in there, but yeah. So yeah. Onions. I'm a fan of onions. It's something that grew on me. I guess when I was a lot younger, I didn't really like onions as much. But it's something that I think when I got older, it's like older. Like I think once I was past my 20s, I started liking onions a lot more than I did before.
Yeah, so typically this is actually a Viennese dish, so this is from the capital. But what I would point out is that typically this is obviously bulked up, because usually what it is you'd use a cheaper cut of beef. You would do onion rings instead of the cipollinis that are like charred like that, and you would do a beef gravy and maybe like a side of potatoes. So it's like it's another one of those like more rustic dish, like steak, potatoes, gravy, and like onion rings on top. If I had to put it very briefly, that's typically how it's prepared. But you know, this is obviously like a higher end take on that. So yeah.
You said like with a lot of higher end places, there's going to be very few higher end places where they have a lot of like deep fried food. It seems to be something that's rather frowned upon in the higher end dishes.
Yeah. You may have a few things. You may have a few things, and like I say, they don't advertise it as fried. Like there was it was a roasted cauliflower puree, and the cauliflower was actually fried. It was really good, but it doesn't say fried cauliflower because people just think like, oh, it's some like cheaper like place if you say that. You know? Sorry, you were gonna ask something or?
No, I'm just thinking with the texture, the sinewness of the meat, the leafiness of the leaves, of course. Then now you have the gel and the purees in there as well. That's So I guess now they want you to you probably won't want to have a bite of the meat with like everything on it, but now you're able to try like some with just the onion and the meat, and some with like the gel and the onions, and you get the different kind of flavors. So you have many different flavors on one dish instead of like going across the board. So that's something interesting. Yeah, a little bit of a journey.
You notice there's not a lot of lime gel or black garlic because those are stronger flavors. So it's like if you were to cut into the beef, you would take maybe like a little bit of each and put it on, or like do one and one, or whichever you prefer. But because the black garlic flavor is very concentrated, you need like a quenelle. The quenelle is the little oval shaped scoop that you see the puree and other things done like that, because it's a potent flavor. You don't need a lot on, like what I said before about truffles, caviar, and other things. Part of it's pricier, but also the flavor's potent, so it's like you're not going to drown the dish in it.
Yeah, it's kind of little small canal. Oh no, the canal. Okay, the canal is right down there. I was looking at the lime things, but no, that's something else. Okay, yeah. And again with the advisory on some of these, like, do you have anybody coming in and be like, I want this like well done, or is it, get out of here with that nonsense?
Well, the general rule wherever I've worked is that we would say the chef recommends medium rare. Like if someone says, "Can I have this well?" we would say the chef recommends medium rare. However, if you prefer that, we'll do it that way. Like I think when my parents came in, I think my dad got this well done because he's kind of skittish about like undercooked stuff. So we're like, we'll do it well for you. It's not something I recommend. I mean, I recommend medium rare, but it's like if they're paying the bills, I mean, you know, you can't really say no.
All right. Anything else you want to add on? Like, why did you consider this one of your favorites?
Well, I mean, I love beef in general, so I'm kind of biased, I guess. But I love black garlic a lot. I think it's a great flavor. Very, it's sweeter, but it's like there's actually my dad actually bought some dried black garlic from Trader Joe's. You can sprinkle and stuff. It's really nice. I like it because it's like it's like garlic. It's like white garlic, but it's not as aggressive. It's a bit sweeter. It's a bit richer. It kind of has its own flavor, and I think it works well on a lot of things. Like you could even get that dried black garlic from Trader Joe's and like sprinkle it on like a beef dish. Like even do like a steak sandwich or something. You could bulk it up. Like you don't need something like super high end. Um, I think if I remember correctly, like you can buy this in like if you go to like an Asian supermarket or like a Korean specialty store, you could get black garlic in packages. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next one.
Yep.
Here we have some sauerbraten.
Yep.
Sauerbraten. Okay.
Yep.
Beef cooked in red wine with red wine reduction, sous vide, celery. This word always throws me off. Celeriac.
Yeah.
Celeriac puree.
Yep.
Apple puree, pickled pearl onions, and pickled celery. No, I was thinking, I think celiac is a word that throws me off, like the celiac disease. That like when I see it, it's like there's a lot of this kind of mungled together to do something in my brain. So I was thinking that was that word as well. Okay, so yeah. So what do you mean red wine reduction sous vide? Does it mean like it's sous vide everything, or the red wine reduction is made in a sous vide technique?
Sure. So this is actually another one of my favorite dishes. Sauerbraten, for those who don't know, it actually means literally sour roast. It's a traditional German dish. You usually get it around Oktoberfest. It's onion. It's beef that's actually been cooked with red wine and red wine vinegar. The idea is that the vinegar, it adds flavor, but it also helps the meat break down so it's more tender. So what the chef did, this was the German chef, his name was Rene. What he did was he actually broke apart the meat. He rolled it into a log with the meat glue, as I described in a previous discussion, and then he actually cooked the meat log sous vide with a combination of the red wine and also red wine vinegar, and then he cut that into these nice round pieces here. And what it is typically it's served with mashed potatoes, but instead he did celeriac puree, and then it's usually applesauce, but instead he did an apple puree. It was more of like an apple gel, like it was the apple juice cooked down and thickened with agar agar. And then typically there were onions, but it was the pickled pearl onions that were just sort of garnished on the plate, and then pickled celery cut into pieces, pickled, and then just a little radish for garnish. So it's a high end take of a very rustic dish. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why I advise people to just try to learn how to cook at home. There's many things that you might like that are just very basic that you can just kick them up. And like, again, we talked about Emerald. He's kind of a bit of a man, but I like that whole kick it up a notch. like you can do that with some of these things. Like this is, as Stephen has described, it's a rather straightforward thing, but then using technology and knowledge, like the sous vide, which is this amazing kind of way that they slow cook things in like water and things like that, to like low heat or a long time. And then now with the agar, knowing about things like that, making the purees. What was that gun thing that you talked about that made some puree type thing? Or it's like
so it's called. It's been called a foam gun, but basically what it is, it's similar to a whipped cream canister where you can open it up, you can put liquid in, then you hook up these NO2 cartridges to it, and then when you pull the trigger, it'll inject NO2 into whatever's in that container. So you can do flavored whipped creams, you could do different purees, all that, and they come out like as a foam, and then that goes on the plate. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just that meat sounds like it would be very amazing, like to have with all that in there. When you do these reductions, how much of the alcohol content stays in reductions?
Well, typically what it is, if I remember correctly, you put the red wine vinegar in the meat when you cooked this, but then what he did was he took it out after the fact, because the thing is, I don't know if it was braised like 24 hours or whatever it was in the bag, but then what you do is you take that out and then you reduce that on the stovetop so it gets concentrated and thicker, and then that's the sauce that gets it gets picked up and it gets poured over on the plate. So like the celeriac puree, that the sauce you see in there, that's the reduction. So a lot of that alcohol cooks out. I mean, I couldn't tell you how much. I would say probably most of it, but you still taste the vinegar and red wine. And like I say, the vinegar and red wine also help break down the meat, plus they impart the flavor. And then when you reduce, the flavor gets really concentrated, so it goes well. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wondering with some of these things, like if you don't drink, or if you have like a rum cake, like how much of rum is actually in there? Like if somebody cooks with like a cup of rum in their cake, you eat the entire cake, is it the equivalent? It's probably not the equivalent of having an entire cup of rum. It's probably some kind of calculation. But yeah, no, this looks good. The plating is This is rather interesting here. Now, with this place, yeah, with something this kind of, you would have its own different character. The things in the same kind of general place, but even if you order two in a row, he's not going to be able to get everything in the same kind of place. But that's still just some of the general idea would still be there. That's how long would it take for him to like? Are there any dishes that you saw? You mentioned that you'd actually taken part in adding, was adding it was some foam. I forgot what you mentioned. It was like, was it lemon foam that you added in one of these
Yeah.
dishes that you actually took a part of it? How long, any of the dishes, did you see them actually develop it from something that wasn't there? We talked also the final form of the foie gras one, where it was like going through different things. How long would it take for somebody to come together with deciding on this kind of plating of this? Did you see any process of something where he's like, okay, I'm inventing this. This is the first time I'm doing this, and then go to the final form that's being served out there?
See, I'm not 100% sure with this because, like I say, sauerbraten is typically like a classical German dish. Like it's really big around like Oktoberfest and things. But like if you see it, like if you were to see a typical version of it, it's a very, very rustic dish. Like I said, it's like it would basically be like a cheaper cut of meat. It would be like mashed potatoes on the side, applesauce here. Like it would be, way less refined. Um, I don't know exactly what went into the thought process behind this. I think he wanted to take some of the ingredients, but like ramp them up a bit and also do like a more creative presentation. He told me that Joachim Wiesler, the German chef we talked about last time, apparently has his own version of this too. I'm curious to see what he does. I tried Googling it. I couldn't find anything, but apparently he is like a higher end Sauerbraten as well. So I don't know, maybe he was inspired by that, but I guess he thought like, okay, instead of mashed potatoes, do celeriac puree. Instead of applesauce, do apple gel, do other pickled vegetables, and then cook the meat sous vide and roll it up in a nice cylinder here so it's a nice presentable shape on the plate rather than just some like tough cut of meat that you've just braised into oblivion.
Yeah, since the gels and the purees and things like that have been used in other dishes, where I think they're more like the highlights of the dish. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
I can see him using a skill set or tools, and it's like, oh, why don't we try to push this onto something else as well? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
good, good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you have to say about this one?
Not really. Again, just another. I thought it was a really cool take on a very rustic dish. Because again, I had this at like Oktoberfest events as a kid, and it like it looks nowhere near this nice, and it wasn't as creative. And I'm a big fan. I love beef. I love celeriac. I love apples. So I thought this was really a brilliant idea. This might be one of those dishes when I have my dream kitchen. Maybe I'll try and recreate or something.
Yeah. Eventually in this series, I think we can get to that point where we have
Yeah.
certain ones where we just kind of just try making different things that are on
Yeah.
there just to go along with this. But yeah, that's that. I mean, great plating. It looks like it would be an interesting day.
Yep.
So next, is this the two of the same things?
Yeah,
I'm not.
it was like before. The presentation was sort of tweaked slightly, so it was like I thought I'd just include both of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, one thing, is this English or is this in German? Because
So
if it's in English, it's just. If it's not, it's like wild.
so so
Fair
it's
enough.
it's actually pronounced Wilt. Like think like Wilt
Ah,
Chamberlain, but say
I was
the
gonna
double.
say that. No,
But say the W as a V sound, so it's just Wilt. Yeah, it just means like
Wild,
game. Yeah, Wilt. Yeah.
Wild. I was gonna
Yeah.
say Wild, but
Yeah.
I wanted the English. Okay, so it's not wild. It's not
Uh-huh.
wild. It's Wild. Wild.
Wilt.
We
Yeah.
have Wild here, which is venison, apple
Yep.
juniper berry cabbage puree, venison jus, and Brussels sprouts. Brussels
Sure.
sprouts are I like Brussels sprouts.
So
So that's the one at the bottom, but the top one. Okay, so the top one is different.
yeah. So if I remember correctly, they were fooling around with fried herbs and things. It looks like on the top it's fried sage and fried parsley. They were considering that as a garnish. Um, let's see, the Jew, and then I'm trying to think what the other thing was. Oh yeah, so it was cabbage puree. So I'm trying to remember exactly what was in that. If it was because you figure like coleslaw, it's white cabbage, so there's that cabbage that's pureed, so there's not too much color. It's not like red cabbage or something where it's like it would be the deep color. Um, I'm not sure what the crunchy item on the top was. Yeah, sorry, I lost some of these items. But what it is it was venison. I think it was the loin, I want to say, but it was prepared with meat glue. Similar story that we described. Like, you break down the meat, roll it up into a cylinder, you know, set it. It's gonna, solidify. Then you cook that. You cook that in the pan. You can turn it so it has even cooking. Um, The cabbage, like I say, I think is cooked slightly, so it's brown, but it's not like I wish I remembered what else was in that. But venison jus is just a reduction from like you sear it in the pan, you add other things, strain off the liquid, reduce it, and then the apple juniper gel is really interesting. It was it was similar to the apple gel I described above, but I think you added more agar to it, so it got super thick. Like it was almost like a cheese or something in terms of texture. Then you took a microplane and you grated it over top, so it would actually come out these like nice long strands. And then you would grind juniper berries very fine and sprinkle a little bit on top. I thought that was really nice because apple juniper game. It's a very like northern German Scandinavian kind of dish. Yeah, this was a wintertime dish as you can imagine too. Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm realizing that some of these photos that you sent me from the kitchen, I posted them, I put them in the video that just released yesterday, which is part 3.
Yep.
But I put them with the foie gras dish because I was thinking that was that foie gras that was in the cylinder that had the layer of fat outside. But now that I'm looking at it, those were actually the preparations for these cylindrical meats with the meat filler, right? With the venison and things like that. Those are the images that you sent me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because
So
the cylinders that was done with everything. Well, not everything, but it was done with like beef. It was done with let's see, beef. This venison. I think it was done with it was done with the lamb too. The chef really preferred this style. Yeah.
okay.
The
So we'll have those on the
the
screen.
the sauerbraten was prepared that way too.
Yeah, all right. So we'll have them on the screen for y'all to see. But yeah, that's again the considerations that people make. If you're going to do something and you're actually going to do it in house, and it's going to be something time heavy, or it's going to take some effort to do it. You putting in 100, if something takes 100 points of energy to do something, doing more of it normally takes less. So if you're going to spend that much time doing something for one dish, you might as well find a way to use that time for like a few other dishes. And that's something that is common to see in these higher end restaurants. People are more economical about the time and the skill sets. If you're going to train somebody to do something a certain way, you might as well get more than one use out of that thing that you're going to train someone to do. Yeah.
Yep.
So was there any other takes on this that you had over the time that maybe you didn't take photographs of, or was this kind of the final form type of thing here with the paste?
I think this was about it. I mean, venison's not one of those items you have on the menu like a lot because usually it's in season a certain time of year. Like for example, I don't know if you saw my picture yesterday at Minetta Tavern. I had a venison entree. Like I usually get it like this time of year when it's in season, but it's like they only hunt deer certain times a year, so it's like it's not something you can get regularly. Like I'll usually order it when it's on the menu, but it's like you can get it maybe like fall or winter. So like this, we only had this like occasionally.
Huh.
Yeah.
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 Looks good. It kind of looks like a little log out there. I was like, interesting.
Yeah.
Logs of meat. Logs of meaty goodness.
Yeah.
The apple juniper berry gel. Yeah, and I don't really have too much to say about the wild.
Wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
Oh, wild.
Uh-huh.
Wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think we can jump on to the next one. The next one, dessert. I think maybe we give them one dessert and then we can have them come back on to the rest of them. So this is give everyone a little taste, and that's okay because this one is a little under the time. We normally aim for around an hour 30 minutes per episode, and the previous one was an hour 45. So maybe this one's a bit shorter, but that's okay. So here we have sacher torte. Sacher torte.
Sacher torte, yeah. So this is interesting. This is actually, So this is actually an interesting story. It's a classical Austrian dish. It goes back to 1832. There was a story about how there was an Austrian prince, Prince Metternich was his name, and I guess he actually requested a dessert for a special occasion, but the chef was ill, so the 16-year-old apprentice, Franz Sacher, actually filled in and came up with this on the fly. So it's a chocolate cake with, it's a dark chocolate cake with apricot jam inside. Typically, it's served with whipped cream that they actually recommend not sweetening. I guess they like sort of the darker chocolate flavor. And it was one of those things that the prince was happy with. So, and then I think Sacher went to start his own hotel. There's a Hotel Sacher. And then, it just became a popular dessert and they kept serving it. Yeah.
Okay. So now with this, would they serve it with different sorts of ice creams or things inside, or?
No, typically just whipped cream like pictured here. I mean, you could obviously order it yourself and do whatever you want, but typically this is how it was served. And if you go to the Hotel Sacher in Vienna, you can actually order this, or there's recipes for it online too. It's fairly basic. I mean, chocolate cake with apricot jam, but it's always nice.
Okay, so it's like two different layers, and then inside is like a layer of apricot jam.
Yep, correct. Yeah.
Okay. And this is in-house made, or desserts is one of the things that you did say is one of the things where in many cases, if something is going to be ordered from out, it's normally going to be the desserts at most restaurants, right?
So the way it worked here was a little unusual for especially a Michelin starred place. But the way it worked was that I mentioned in the previous discussion how the chefs actually ran catering out of the German embassy, and there was a big kitchen there. So there was like basically a production crew there that would make a lot of this stuff and then would send it to us. So like it's a little unusual for a Michelin starred place because typically you would have people in house making stuff and then there would be a pastry station. But because this was smaller, what happened was they did a lot of like the heavier like stuff like that, and then we would just serve it or maybe like make some last minute components. So like we'd whip the cream ourselves and then like put that on the plate, but then like they would actually bake the cake and then like we might do like little garnishes and things.
Yeah, that's still rather relatively in-house. It might be
Yeah.
in multiple houses, like it's still coming from the same kind of production line, same kind of people. I don't really consider that as a different. It's different from like ordering from an entirely different company with entirely different people with entirely different standards. This is still done like it's like the chef makes. If the chef was making the cakes in his home kitchen and then bringing them in, I don't think people would be like, oh, that's ordered from out. So if they're making it in the kitchen that they also want, then I don't think it's as big of an issue.
Yeah, it's just kind of unusual because typically in like especially higher end places like you have like a whole pastry section and there's like a whole crew that just comes in and just like does stuff. But I mean, the way this place was set up, it's like it didn't really allow for that, and like I think there were issues with budgeting and all that. But like if you go to Danielle or something, there's like a whole full-fledged pastry team that just comes in and like, one makes ice cream, one does like certain pastries, one does a certain cake, the chef designs, but like it's not, given our setup, it wasn't really realistic.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this zooming in. It seems to be a rather dense cake, like more like one of those thicker brownie type of things, right?
It's actually a sponge. It's actually a sponge. It's actually a chocolate sponge cake. It's kind of lighter, but it like there's the topping though is more like dark chocolate, and it's not overly sweet because I mean the jam makes it the jam makes it a bit sweeter.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be more like dense, like more like a lot more moist. I didn't think it's like a fluffier. Okay, that's interesting. And the creme fraiche on the side. Okay, yeah. Well, okay. One more thing with Black Forest. Why is Black Forest called Black Forest? And it's normally like a German. It's normally attributed to. Is it like from the area called Black Forest?
Yeah.
Was there somebody named Black Forest, like a sacher torte or sacher torte?
No.
But yeah.
No, there's actually an area in Germany called the Black Forest. The German name is actually Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, which actually means Black Forest cherry cake. Kirsch, like my last name, and so it's literally Black Forest cherry cake. I don't know all the history behind that. Maybe something to look up, but like I guess it's just popular in that area, like dark chocolate, and they added cherries, or I'm not really sure the whole story.
We might open up the next one with that, but it's cool. It's far from here. But yeah. So I think that's it for today. And we've gone through. So as you mentioned, that's it for the entrees. We've gone to the desserts. There's still a bunch of desserts left for the next one. So y'all can definitely come back and meet us in that one. So there'll be at least one more part. I think we should be able to get the desserts done in one more part. I think from history we don't really have as much to say on the desserts. It's just like the typical thing of just me going through and trying to see if I can pick out. There was like I'm going to try to remember these. It was caramel, citrus, chocolate. Man, I'm trying. I always forget. There's like a fourth way. What's the fourth thing?
Coffee.
Yeah. Yes, the four C's. There's only four C's that are only involved in it. So as you've seen in this one, it definitely has the chocolate in there. Apricot's kind of citrusy, so there might even be two in this one. But that's one thing with the desserts. Like, it's normally a thing in the culinary arts to include one of those four C's if you're going to make a typically appealing dessert. And that's something that I normally have fun trying to point out and just trying to remember and see. And of course, there's exceptions to that rule, but that's there. Anything else you want to say about this?
No, I mean, we just have desserts left. The desserts here were very good, of course. I mean, to be a Michelin star, they have to be. So, the desserts here, it was kind of an interesting experience because typically garde manger, you don't do pastry, but it was kind of nice because, I did learn a little bit of that side of it as well. As we've talked about before, baking and cooking are way different because baking is very precise, very exact science. Cooking, there's a bit more leeway. But I do enjoy like really intricate desserts, and I mean, it is fun to learn more about that. So I thought that was a good experience for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And with some of these, one of the things we normally talk about sometimes is like the skill level of making certain things a lot more difficult. And with these, the entrees and things like that, I think when you go into the pastes and the purees and the glue and the meat glue and things like that, you can see there is a higher level of risk. I mean, a high level of challenge to make some of these dishes. Of course, once you learn how to do one of these things, you can now use them in many different ways. But with the desserts, that could be something where it's like, hey, now maybe some of these are rather more straightforward to try. And also, this is something that you'd find at other restaurants and things like that, where it's not, some of these dishes are very specific to this place. So if you did get to that Seäsonal, it's going to be tough to find, like Stephen mentioned with, it's going to be really hard to find the sauerbraten somewhere else in that kind of way. That's like something that's been unique. So now that that's gone, that's been gone from the food universe until you find somewhere else or you make it yourself. But with some of these desserts, maybe you'll be able to find some things that are similar to this. But yeah, I don't know. Anything
I mean, you can either, I was just going to add, I mean, you can either, if you can't find this like higher end version of this elsewhere, just try and recreate it yourself. Like, it may not come out as well initially, but I mean, you try doing it a few times. I mean, maybe you'll get the hang of it, or, even do your own twist on it. I mean, maybe you could do, instead of celeriac puree, do plum puree, but do like a nicer version, or like maybe, add truffles, or like, I mean, you can be creative. I mean, do your own thing. Yeah.
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 Okay. So yeah, that's it for me. And guys, gals, and everything else in between, thank you all very much for watching. Let us know what you think about these dishes, if you've had anything similar to Austrian food, or also let us know, there's been some issues in New York City, but Stephen has a lot of other foods that he's been going to, a few other places that he's been to before. He also has other places that he's worked that we're going to think of discussing. We're still not quite sure what exactly we're going to go with next. Maybe neta, it could be something that goes like Japanese, and we haven't touched on like the Asian foods yet, and we've touched on mostly European cuisines and things like that. But yeah, so we'll see where we go with that. So far, we've been doing these once a week. We release these, and we have a lot of content coming in. I have different projects in mind as well, but we're more focused on creating content and just enjoying having these conversations, getting more people involved with it, getting more feedback from y'all out there, and yeah. So anything else, Stephen?
Nope, that's all. Another good discussion. I enjoyed it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.